the ancestral home and the forbidden room. The village of Umudike was known for its rich history, ancient traditions, and powerful ancestral spirits that watched over its people. At the heart of this village stood a grand compound, the home of the Ogbonna family, a household respected for its wealth, honor, and wisdom. Chief Ikena Ogbonna, a towering man with silver-streaked hair, was the patriarch of the family. His wife, Mama Chinye, was known for her sharp mind and unwavering faith in the gods. Their children, Nkem, the eldest son, and Adaora, his younger sister, were raised under strict traditions, learning the ways of their people. The Ogbonna home was vast, with courtyards, servant quarters, and a sacred shrine for the ancestors. However, the house had one unbreakable rule: no one, not even the servants, was to open the forbidden room. The room sat at the farthest end of the house, its thick wooden doors etched with ancient carvings. It was always locked, and over the years, dust and vines had begun to claim its exterior. Villagers whispered about its origins, but no one knew the truth, except for Chief Ogbonna. "Listen, my children," he had warned Nkem and Adaora on many occasions. "That room must never be opened. It holds whispers of the past that should remain undisturbed." Their mother reinforced the warning, her voice low with fear. Not everything hidden should be found. The siblings had obeyed for years, though curiosity gnawed at their minds like a restless spirit. But curiosity is a powerful thing. The whispering begins. One night, as the full moon bathed the compound in pale light, Nkem awoke to the sound of whispers. He sat up, rubbing his eyes. The voices were soft, almost like a breeze rustling through dry leaves. He glanced at his sister. Adaora was fast asleep, her face peaceful under the dim lantern light. The whispers grew louder. Nkem's pulse quickened. He crept out of bed, following the sound. The forbidden room. The voices were coming from behind the locked door. His hands trembled as he reached for the handle. He knew he shouldn't. He had been warned. But curiosity is a heavy burden. He pressed his ear against the wood. The whispers became clearer, as if calling his name. "Nkem. Nkem, find the truth." His breath hitched. He stumbled backward, heart racing. The whispers stopped. The night fell silent. The first mistake. The next morning, Nkem could barely eat. He stared at the door, mind clouded with questions. Why had he never heard the whispers before? What truth did they speak of? "Nkem, are you even listening?" Adaora frowned, placing a hand on his arm. He blinked. "Sorry. I was just thinking." Adaora followed his gaze to the forbidden room. "You heard it too, didn't you?" He whipped his head toward her. "What?" She lowered her voice. "I heard the whispers last night." A chill ran down his spine. "Ada, we need to know what's inside." Her eyes widened in fear. "Papa said." "Papa never told us why. What if it's something important? Something we need to know?" She hesitated, chewing her bottom lip. "I don't know, Nkem." But Nkem had already made up his mind. That night, they would return. And they would open the door. A door that should never be opened. Under the cover of darkness, the siblings crept toward the forbidden room. The air felt heavy, as if the spirits of the house were watching. Nkem produced a small iron key. He had taken it from their father's study earlier that day, though he had no idea if it would work. His hands shook as he inserted the key. Click. The door unlocked. A cold gust of wind swept through the hallway. Adaora shivered. "Nkem. I have a bad feeling about this." He ignored her. Slowly, he pushed the door open. Dust swirled in the dim moonlight, and the air smelled of damp earth and old wood. Inside, the room was lined with ancient scrolls, wooden masks, and strange artifacts covered in cobwebs. But in the center of the room stood something far more unsettling. An old mirror. It was tall, framed with blackened wood, its glass oddly polished despite the dust covering everything else. And then the whispers returned. But this time, they were not soft. They were urgent. Hissing. Angry. Nkem's body froze. Adaora whimpered. The mirror began to glow. And then a shadow moved inside it. Something was looking back at them. Nkem tried to speak, but his voice failed him. The whispers grew louder, wrapping around them like a storm. And then, the deep voice boomed from within the mirror. You have awakened the whispers. Now, you must pay the price. The beginning of the end. Adaora screamed. Nkem grabbed her wrist, yanking her away. The door slammed shut behind them. The house shook. From the shadows, figures emerged, tall, dark silhouettes with glowing red eyes. The spirits had been released. And in the silence of the night, the Ogbonna family's fate was sealed. The curse of the shadows. The silence that followed the voice in the mirror was thick and suffocating. Nkem's pulse thundered in his ears as he stood frozen, gripping Adaora's wrist. She trembled beside him, her breath ragged. Nkem, we shouldn't be here. The room was darker now, the air heavier, as if the walls were breathing. The whispering voices had not stopped, they slithered through the air, wrapping around them like unseen hands. Then, without warning, the mirror cracked. A jagged line split the glass from top to bottom, and something moved inside it, a shadow, shifting, twisting, growing. Nkem yanked Adaora toward the door. Run! But before they could escape, the door slammed shut behind them, sealing them inside. Adaora shrieked, pounding on the wooden surface. Let us out. Please. The whispers turned to laughter, deep, chilling, and full of something ancient. Then, the room changed. The dusty shelves warped, the carved masks twisted into expressions of rage, and the cracked mirror paused like a living thing. And then the shadows stepped forward. The awakening of the spirits. At first, they were just flickers of darkness, shifting across the walls. Then, they took form, tall, thin figures with hollow eyes and elongated hands, their bodies woven from darkness itself. Adaora pressed herself against Nkem. What are they? Nkem could barely speak. He didn't know. The largest of the shadows stepped forward. Its hollow eyes fixed on them, and when it opened its mouth, the whispering grew louder, 1,000 voices speaking at once. The bloodline of the betrayer has come. The debt must be paid. Betrayer. Nkem's breath caught. What were they talking about? The shadow lifted a hand, and Adaora gasped as an invisible force yanked her forward. No. Nkem lunged, grabbing her wrist, but the force was too strong. Adaora's feet left the ground, her body floating toward the darkness. Her screams pierced the air. The shadow's hollow voice echoed again. The sins of the father must be answered by the children. Then, a sudden knock at the door. A deep, commanding voice rang through the room. Begone, spirits of the forgotten. You have no place here. The shadows let out a furious hiss as the door was thrown open. Standing there, lantern in hand, was Baba Ejike, the village storyteller and diviner. The moment the light of the lantern touched the room, the shadows recoiled, shrieking, and the mirror cracked further. The whispering turned into wails of agony, and then silence. The shadows vanished. Adaora collapsed to the floor, gasping for breath. Nkem, still shaking, turned to Baba Ejike. What just happened? The old man's face was grave. You two have awakened a curse that should never have been disturbed. The curse revealed. Baba Ejike led them to the family shrine, where Chief Ogbonna and Mama Chinya were waiting. The moment their father saw them, his face went pale. No. He whispered, shaking his head. Tell me you did not open the room. Nkem swallowed hard. We did, Papa. We had to know the truth. Their mother covered her mouth, eyes wide with horror. Baba Ejike's voice was firm. The whispers have returned, Ikena. The curse has awakened. Chief Ogbonna slumped into a chair, burying his face in his hands. Then it is too late. Adaora wiped the tears from her eyes. Too late for what? What is happening? Their father took a deep breath. Then, in a voice heavy with regret, he spoke. You were never meant to know this, but our family carries a sin from long ago. A betrayal so great that it angered the spirits of our ancestors. The forbidden room was sealed to keep them trapped, but now, you have set them free. Betrayal? Nkem asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Their father nodded. Generations ago, our ancestor, Ogbonna, killed his own brother to steal his wealth and land. But before he died, his brother cursed our bloodline, saying that our family would never know peace until his death was avenged. The spirits of the ancestors trapped his soul in that room, and now, it is free once again. A heavy silence filled the air. Nkem felt like the ground beneath him had crumbled. A blood curse. Their own family had murdered one of their own. Mama Chinya clutched her chest. What do we do? How do we stop it? Baba Ejike's face was grim. There is only one way to end the curse. He looked at Nkem and Adaora. A sacrifice must be made. One of the bloodline must atone for the betrayal with their own life. The price of the past. Nkem's heart nearly stopped. What? Adaora gasped, shaking her head. No, there has to be another way. Baba Ejike's eyes were filled with sorrow. The spirits will not rest until justice is served. If no one atones, the curse will grow stronger, and the shadows will consume this family, one by one. Chief Ogbonna trembled. I am the head of this house. If a sacrifice must be made, let it be me. Baba Ejike shook his head. The spirits do not want the old. They want the young, for it was the future that was stolen from them. His gaze fell on Nkem and Adaora. One of them had to die. The room was silent. Then, in a broken whisper, Adaora said, there must be another way. There has to be. Baba Ejike sighed. There is only one other option. But it is far more dangerous. Nkem's voice was hoarse. What is it? The old storyteller locked eyes with him. A trial. The trial of the ancestors. If you can prove your worth, the spirits may spare your bloodline. Nkem swallowed hard. And if I fail? Baba Ejike's face darkened. Then the shadows will claim you first, and your family will suffer a fate worse than death. The whispers in the air began again, soft, mocking, and full of malice. The shadows had not left. They were waiting. Watching. The trial had begun. The forgotten betrayal. The air in the Ogbonna household was thick with dread. The walls seemed closer, as if pressing in, suffocating them under the weight of their family's dark past. The flickering lantern cast long shadows across the room, making it impossible to tell where the darkness ended and where the spirits lurked. Nkem's heart pounded as he replayed Baba Ejike's words. A trial. The trial of the ancestors. If you can prove your worth, the spirits may spare your bloodline. He clenched his fist. If this was the only way to save his family, then he would face it. The call of the ancestors. Baba Ejike placed a small clay bowl filled with dark water before him. The liquid was so still it looked like glass, reflecting Nkem's tense face. Drink, the old man commanded. Nkem hesitated. Adaora gripped his arm. Nkem, please, we don't know what this will do to you. He turned to her, offering a weak smile. I have to, Ada. With a deep breath, he tilted the bowl to his lips. The water was cold, bitter, and metallic, the taste of earth and something ancient. The moment it slid down his throat, the world around him vanished. The realm of the ancestors. Nkem's body felt weightless, floating in an endless void. The world was silent, save for the occasional whisper, drifting like wine through dead leaves. Then, torches ignited around him. He stood in a vast, ancient courtyard, surrounded by towering stone pillars, each carved with the faces of his ancestors. At the center of the courtyard sat a long wooden throne, occupied by a figure cloaked in darkness. The moment Nkem's eyes landed on the figure, an unbearable pressure pressed down on him, forcing him to his knees. "You have disturbed the silence of the past," the figure spoke, its voice a deep, rolling thunder. "You seek to undo a curse that was earned in blood. Do you believe yourself worthy?" Nkem forced himself to meet its gaze. "I do." A sharp, bitter laugh echoed. "Then you will prove it. Face the trials, or be consumed by the shadows as your ancestor should have been." The first trial, truth. The torches around the courtyard blazed brighter, and suddenly, the scene changed. Nkem was no longer in the ancestral court. Instead, he stood in the middle of the village, surrounded by its people. The sky was dark, heavy with thunderclouds. Before him, a man was being dragged by the wrist, his face bloodied and beaten. Nkem's breath caught. It was Ogbonna, the ancestor who had betrayed his own brother. "Lies!" The villagers screamed. "Thief! Murderer!" The crowd swarmed around Obi, fists raised, eyes filled with hatred. Then, a voice echoed through the storm. "Would you have done the same had you stood in his place?" Nkem whirled around. The cloaked figure was standing beside him now, watching him with hollow, empty eyes. "Speak your truth, child of the betrayer. Would you have chosen family, or power?" Nkem's hands curled into fists. This was a test. He looked at Obi, his ancestor, his blood. The man had chosen greed over family, betrayal over honor. He had killed his own brother, shattering the bond that should have lasted generations. And now, because of that choice, his own family was suffering. Nkem's throat was dry. He had no choice but to answer. "I would have chosen family." The storm howled, but the figure tilted its head. "Would you?" The vision shifted, and now, Nkem saw himself standing before the forbidden room, key in hand. He had disobeyed. He had given into curiosity. Just as Obi had given into greed. Nkem felt his chest tighten. He had been no different. The truth hit him like a hammer. He had made his choice, just as his ancestor had. He had opened the door despite the warnings, despite knowing it could bring disaster. And now, his family was paying the price. His voice shook. "I was wrong. I let my curiosity blind me. Just as Obi let his greed consume him." The cloaked figure studied him for a long moment. Then, the vision faded. The first trial was over. The second trial, strength. The courtyard returned, but this time, Nkem was not alone. Before him stood a shadowy version of himself, identical in every way, except for its eyes, which were empty voids, endless and terrifying. The figure smirked, cracking its knuckles. "You think you can fight fate?" Before Nkem could react, the shadow lunged. He barely had time to dodge as a blade materialized in its hands, slashing through the air where his neck had been. Nkem rolled aside, panting. The shadow came again, its movement swift, precise. Nkem blocked, countered, struggled. But every time he struck, the shadow grew stronger, faster. It was his weakness. His doubt. His fear. And as long as he fought it like an enemy, it would never be defeated. "You are me," Nkem whispered. "And I accept you." The shadow froze. Nkem lowered his arms. The figure trembled, then dissolved into mist. The second trial was over. The third trial, sacrifice. Nkem barely had time to catch his breath before the final trial began. This time, he found himself standing before Adaora. She was crying. And in front of her stood a spirit with a knife, blade pressed against her throat. The cloaked figure returned, its voice cold. Choose, child of the betrayer. Your blood, or hers. Nkem's world tilted. This was the sacrifice. One of them had to die. His heart screamed Eno. But Adaora met his eyes, her face calm. Nkem, she whispered, I will do this for our family. His body shook. No. I won't let you. But the spirit's grip tightened. Choose. The air crackled with power. The spirits were waiting. And in that moment, Nkem knew. There was no escape. One of them would not leave this place alive. And the choice had to be made. The price must be paid. Would he accept the curse for himself? Or let his sister make the sacrifice? As the spirits closed in, waiting for their answer, Nkem made his decision. The trial of the ancestors. The air in the ancestral court was heavy, thick with the weight of generations long past. The spirits, watching, waiting, hovered in silence, their hollow eyes fixed on Nkem. The spirit with the knife still held Adaora, the blade pressed against her throat. The cloaked figure's voice was like 1,000 whispers woven together. Choose, child of the betrayer. Your blood, or hers. Adaora trembled but did not resist. Nkem, she whispered, if this is the price to save our family, I will pay it. Her voice was soft, steady, resigned. Nkem's body shook. This couldn't be happening. How could he choose? His sister, his Adaora, the only person in the world who had stood by his side, the one who had shared his fears, his secrets, his childhood. He could not let her die. But if he took her place, would she be strong enough to carry the burden of their family's survival? Could she live with knowing he had given his life for hers? The spirits whispered impatiently. The air tightened, pressing down on him like the weight of the world itself. Choose. The choice that cannot be reversed. Nkem closed his eyes, his mind racing. Then, suddenly, he understood. This trial was never about choosing between life and death. It was about courage. About accepting fate instead of running from it. The spirits did not want blood. They wanted atonement. With a deep breath, Nkem took a step forward, raising his hands. I accept my ancestors' crime. The whispers fell silent. The spirit holding Adaora froze, the knife inches from her skin. I take responsibility, Nkem continued, not because I wish to die, but because I will not let our family's curse pass on to future generations. The spirits shifted, as if murmuring among themselves. The cloaked figure tilted its head. You do not beg for mercy. Nkem's chest heaved, but his voice was steady. No. I will not beg. My ancestor took a life to gain power. I will not do the same. If you demand justice, take my life, but let my family be free. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the spirit with the knife turned the blade inward and plunged it into its own chest. Adaora gasped, falling to her knees as the spirit collapsed into mist. The torches in the ancestral court flared, the shadows recoiling, shrinking, fading. And the cloaked figure nodded. You have passed the trial. Breaking the curse. Nkem felt the world tilt, the weight of unseen hands lifting from his shoulders. The shadows around him dissolved, whispering as they disappeared into the void. The curse was breaking. A deep, echoing voice filled the space. Your ancestor chose greed, but you have chosen honor. Your bloodline is forgiven. As the voice faded, so did the ancestral court. And Nkem's world went dark, waking to a new fate. When he opened his eyes, he was back in the Ogbonna family shrine, lying on the ground. His body ached, his mind swam with exhaustion. Adaora knelt beside him, tears streaking her face. Nkem, you're alive. He groaned, sitting up slowly. Baba Ejike stood nearby, watching him with approval. The spirits have released you, the old man murmured. The curse has been lifted. Nkem turned to his father. Chief Ogbonna's eyes were filled with tears, his normally stern face softened with emotion. You have done what I could not, my son. The moment those words left his lips, the house seemed lighter. The air was no longer heavy. The whispers were gone. A family healed, but not forgotten. That night, for the first time in generations, the Ogbonna family slept in peace. The forbidden room was sealed forever, its doors bound with sacred symbols, never to be opened again. The village rejoiced when they heard of the curse's end, though few knew the true story. But Nkem and Adaora did. And they would never forget. The shadows will always whisper. Even in the years that followed, Nkem sometimes thought he heard faint whispers in the wind. Not curses. Not warnings. But reminders. That secrets, when buried, do not die. They whisper. Until someone listens. Until the truth is set free. The sacrifice that cannot be undone. The village of Umudike buzzed with whispers. Word had spread, though the true details remained hidden. That something had changed in the Ogbonna household. The air around their compound, once thick with unseen forces, felt lighter, freer. But inside, Nkem knew the truth. The curse had been lifted. But not without cost. The shadows had been silenced, but their echoes remained. And with the secrets of the past uncovered, a new weight pressed upon the Ogbonna family. The weight of truth. Nkem sat outside, staring at the forbidden room, its doors now permanently sealed with sacred symbols. The room that had once housed whispers of the past was silent, but the silence was almost louder than the voices had been. Adaora sat beside him, hugging her knees. Does it feel real to you? She asked softly. He sighed, running a hand over his face. I don't know. She looked at him then, her eyes full of something heavy. You almost gave your life for this family, Nkem. I don't know if I could have done the same. Nkem turned to her, brow furrowed. You were willing to sacrifice yourself first. She looked away. I didn't have a choice. I couldn't watch you die. A long silence stretched between them. Then Adaora whispered, we can never tell anyone what really happened, can we? He shook his head. No. Some truths are too heavy to share. They would carry this burden alone. The unexpected consequence. Days turned to weeks, and though the shadows had vanished, something was wrong. It started with their father. Chief Ogbonna, once a proud and powerful man, now barely spoke. He spent his days staring into the distance, hands trembling. Then, their mother, Mama Chinyere, always strong and steady, became distant. Her once sharp tongue had dulled, her voice quiet. She spent long hours in prayer, as if trying to erase something from her soul. Even the servants felt it. The house had changed. Peace had come, but at a price. And Nkem feared it was not yet over. The night of the spirits. One night, Nkem was jolted awake by a sound. A whisper. He froze, his heart pounding. Had the spirits returned? The room was dark, save for the dim glow of the lantern near his door. Slowly, he sat up, scanning the room. Then he saw it. A shadow, not like before. Not evil. But familiar. A figure standing at the foot of his bed. A woman. Nkem's throat went dry. Adaora. She did not move. His sister's face was unreadable, her eyes dark and unfocused. And then she whispered, "They are not gone." A chill crawled up Nkem's spine. "What?" Adaora tilted her head, her voice distant. "The spirits. They are watching. Waiting." Nkem swallowed. The curse was lifted. She didn't answer. Instead, she slowly lifted her hand and pointed to the door. To the forbidden room. A secret that won't stay buried. Nkem felt a cold sweat break over his skin. The room had been sealed. The curse had been broken. Hadn't it? His hands clenched into fists. "No. I won't go back in there." Adaora didn't move. Then, her lips parted. And a voice that was not her own spoke. "The debt is not yet paid." The lantern flickered violently. The shadows swirled. Then, Adaora collapsed. The price of the past. Nkem leapt to his feet, catching his sister before she hit the ground. She was cold. Too cold. He shook her gently. "Ada. Wake up." Her eyes fluttered open, confusion washing over her face. "Nkem, what happened?" His breath came ragged. You were standing there, whispering. Saying the spirits were still watching." She blinked. "I don't remember." Fear coiled in Nkem's gut. This was not over. Somehow, the spirits still lingered. Had the trial not been enough? Or was there something else, something they had missed? The final revelation. Baba Ejike was waiting when they arrived at his hut the next morning. Before they could speak, the old man nodded. "I know why you have come." Adaora shivered. "The spirits spoke to me, Baba. They said the debt is not yet paid." The diviner's expression darkened. "Then you have not yet uncovered the final truth." Nkem frowned. "Final truth. I passed the trial. The spirits forgave us." Baba Ejike shook his head. "The spirits do not forgive so easily, child. They may have lifted the curse, but they still seek justice." Nkem's stomach twisted. "Justice for what?" The old man's gaze pierced through him. Then he sighed heavily, rubbing his hands together. "For the one who still suffers." Nkem and Adaora exchanged confused glances. Baba Ejike motioned for them to sit. "Listen well, children. Your ancestor, Obi Ogbonna, killed his own brother, but there was another victim that history has forgotten." Adaora's fingers tightened around her shawl. "Who?" Baba Ejike leaned forward, his voice barely above a whisper. "The wife of the murdered brother." Nkem's blood ran cold. The diviner continued. "She was heavy with child when her husband was murdered. When Obi took the land, he cast her out, claiming she carried a cursed bloodline." Adaora gasped. Baba Ejike's face darkened further. "She died alone, her unborn child with her. But her spirit never left. She has waited in silence. Waited for the day when justice would be served." Nkem felt his chest tighten. "You mean, the whispers weren't just from the brother?" Baba Ejike nodded. "No. The whispers were hers. The wife. The mother. The one who was erased from history." A heavy silence settled over the room. Then Adaora whispered, "So the curse isn't over, because she still suffers." Baba Ejike sighed. "Yes. And if you do not set her soul free, the spirits will never truly rest." Nkem's stomach clenched. He had thought the worst was behind them. But the whispers were not finished. And now, he and Adaora would have to face the final truth. No matter what it cost. The ghost of regret. The weight of Baba Ejike's words settled like a stone in Nkem's chest. The whispers were not only from Obi's brother. They were from his wife, the woman who was erased from history. The realization sent a shudder through both Nkem and Adaora. They had only solved part of the curse. The final spirit, the one who had suffered in silence, was still waiting. A soul that won't rest. That night, the whispers returned. But this time, they were not from the shadows. They were from her. Nkem woke in the middle of the night to a soft weeping. At first, he thought it was Adaora. But when he turned, he saw her. A woman draped in white, her face hidden beneath a veil. She stood near the sealed door of the forbidden room, her body motionless, but her soul spilling into the air like mist. Adaora sat up beside him, eyes widening. Nkem, do you see her too? He nodded slowly, his body stiff with fear. The woman did not speak. She only wept. And when she finally raised her head, her face was hollow, sunken, eyes darkened with grief so deep it could never be erased. And in a voice like wine through broken trees, she whispered, "My child was never buried. The missing grave." At dawn, they rushed to Baba Ejike's hut. The old diviner was already awake, as if he had expected them. Before Nkem could speak, Baba Ejike nodded. "She has spoken to you, hasn't she?" Adaora wrapped her arms around herself. "She said her child was never buried." Baba Ejike sighed, rubbing his face. "Then that is the key." Nkem frowned. "What do you mean?" The old man turned to him. "The dead cannot rest if their bodies are left forgotten. If the mother's child was never given a burial, her soul will remain trapped between the living and the dead, forever searching." Adaora's voice trembled. "So, if we find the child's remains and give them a proper burial, will she finally rest?" Baba Ejike nodded. "Yes. But you must act quickly. Spirits that wait too long begin to lose themselves. If we do not help her soon, she may never leave." The search for the lost child. Finding the remains of a forgotten child was not going to be easy. The land had changed. The village had grown over the centuries, and what had once been farmland was now homes, pathways, and shrines. But there was one place that remained untouched. The ancient well. It stood behind the Ogbonna compound, covered in vines, abandoned for as long as anyone could remember. A place where no one dared to go. The villagers said it was haunted, a place where whispers echoed, where cold hands reached out from the depths. Nkem felt a chill settle over him as he and Adaora stood before the old well. The stones were cracked with age. The vines twisted like gnawed fingers. Adaora swallowed hard. "If the child is here, how do we find them?" Baba Ejike placed a small bowl of palm oil beside the well. "We call to her." Then he began to chant. His voice was low and rhythmic, ancient words rolling through the air like waves. The wind shifted. The vines rustled. And then, a wail rose from the well. Adaora covered her ears, stepping back. "Nkem." The earth trembled. And in the next moment, the stones of the well cracked apart. And something small, wrapped in cloth, rose from the darkness below. The burial of the forgotten. The remains of the child were so small, so fragile, it made Nkem's heart ache. The spirits had not lied. The baby had been thrown into the well, left to rot in the darkness. No prayers. No burial. Only silence and suffering. Tears ran down Adaora's face as she lifted the tiny, cloth-wrapped bones into her arms. "She was telling the truth," she whispered. Baba Ejike nodded solemnly. "Now, we must give them rest." The burial was held at the edge of the village, beneath the sacred Iroko tree where the ancestors were honored. A small grave was dug. A simple stone was placed. And as Nkem and Adaora placed the child's remains into the earth, they whispered their final words. Rest now. You are home. As they covered the grave, the air shifted. The wind carried a soft sigh. A feeling of warmth, of relief, of peace. And when Nkem turned, the woman in white was gone. She had finally found rest. The shadows fell silent. That night, for the first time in centuries, the Ogbonna household was still. No whispers. No shadows. Only quiet. As Nkem lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, he finally allowed himself to believe. It was over. Adaora's voice drifted through the darkness. Nkem, do you think they are truly at peace now? He took a deep breath. And for the first time in a long, long while, he answered with certainty. Yes. They are finally home. The legacy of the whispering shadows. The village of Umudike never knew the full story. But the whispers faded. The shadows never returned. And though the forbidden room remained sealed, its story passed down through generations. Not as a tale of fear, but as a warning. That secrets, when buried, do not die. They whisper. Until someone is brave enough to listen. The lesson of the whispers. The days that followed the burial of the forgotten child were unlike any Nkem had ever known. For the first time in generations, the Ogbonna household was at peace. No more whispers in the wind. No more shadows creeping in the night. Only quiet. A peace that should have been there all along. A village that remembers. The elders of Umudike gathered a few nights after the burial. Chief Ogbonna, once burdened by guilt and regret, now stood before them a changed man. He told them of the woman who had suffered in silence, of the child who had never been given a name, and of how their spirits had finally found peace. The village mourned. They had always spoken of the betrayal of Ogbonna, but none had known of the innocent life that was lost alongside it. And so, by order of the elders, the village decided. Every year, a ceremony would be held under the Iroko tree to honor the spirits who had suffered without a voice. To remind future generations never to let history repeat itself. And most of all, to remember that secrets, when buried, do not die. They whisper. Until someone listens. A family rebuilt. Nkem and Adaora stood side by side as their father addressed the family shrine. He placed a single white feather at the altar, an offering of peace. And then, for the first time in their lives, they saw their father bow his head and weep. Not from guilt. Not from fear. But from relief. The sins of the past had been lifted. The whispers had faded into silence. Their family was whole again. The final visit. That night, as Nkem lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, he felt a soft breeze drift through the room. For a moment, he thought nothing of it. Then, a whisper. Not in fear. Not in warning. But in gratitude. He turned toward the window. And in the moonlight, he saw her. The woman in white. She no longer wept. She only smiled. And then, she was gone. The story that must be told. Years passed. Nkem and Adaora grew, each forging their own path in life. But the story of the whispering shadows never left them. One day, under the shade of the great Iroko tree, a group of children sat, wide-eyed, as an elder told the tale. The tale of a family's betrayal, of spirits that whispered in the night, and of a boy who listened, who faced the past so that the future could be free. A tale of secrets, loss, and redemption. And as Nkem, now a grown man, watched from afar, he knew. The story would never die. Because stories, like whispers, live on until someone listens. Final words. If you ever walk through the village of Umudike, stop beneath the great Iroko tree. There, you will find a small stone marker, barely noticeable beneath the roots. And if you listen closely, you might hear a soft breeze, carrying an ancient whisper. Not in warning. Not in fear. But in peace. Because some whispers, when finally heard, can rest forever.